600년간 이어진 고유 한복은 세계에서 제일 길며 그것은 고구려 고분 벽화와 신라 백제 유물로도 확인이 됩니다. 한국인의 정체성과 역사가 담긴 한국의 소중한 문화유산이라 할 수 있죠. 한국 바로 알리기 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
Exports of ICT products in January reached their record high for the month, topping $29 billion, with semiconductors leading the increase. U.S. job growth surprisingly strengthened in January, alleviating near-term fears of a sharp labor market slowdown. But experts caution that the underlying job market remains fragile over the long haul. After his first 6 months in office, Culture Minister Choi-Young met with the press corps on Thursday and outlined his vision for a broadening K-culture, including the ministry's plans to back BTS's upcoming comeback concert next month. Ahead of the upcoming Lunar New Year holiday, President Lee Jae-myung has called for the need to thoroughly monitor price rigging and monopolies. During a weekly meeting with his aides on Thursday, he urged a related task force to not only deal with short-term measures to stabilize consumer prices, but also address structural problems in the distribution process. President Lee pointed out certain cases where private firms exploited the import tariff system by refusing to lower prices, despite the government granting lower quota tariffs on certain items. The special task force to manage costs was launched the previous day. The National Assembly held a plenary session on Thursday to process a series of livelihood-related bills, despite a boycott by the main opposition People Power Party. The ruling Democratic Party moved ahead to pass 63 bills that had been agreed upon the opposition in advance after the PPP pulled out in protest over the passage of judicial reform bills by a National Assembly committee the previous day. The agenda included revisions expanding spousal parental leave before childbirth and tightening personal data protection rules. The DP said it moved forward to prevent a legislative vacuum while slamming the opposition's absence as irresponsible. In other news, Culture Minister Choi-Young sat down with members of the media to mark his first 6 months in office today and touch upon BTS and more. Our correspondent Park Kwon-woo follows this report.
From crisis to hope, South Korea's culture minister says he's witnessed renewed optimism in the cultural sector over the past 6 months. He noted that the industry's core strength and passion remains strong adding that K-culture continues to expand its global reach. One of the ministry's key priorities is BTS's upcoming comeback show to be held in March at Gwanghwamun Square, one of Seoul's most symbolic landmarks, known for major rallies and public gatherings.
It's grateful and meaningful that globally renowned artist BTS have chosen Gwanghwamun as their new starting point. That's why we're doing our best while working closely with BTS so that we can showcase Korea's traditional heritage and cultural essence to the world.
The minister added that support measures are also being prepared for international visitors attending the concert, stressing that collaborative concerts with Korean artists will extend beyond BTS. Choi also reaffirmed efforts to crack down on ticket scalping at large events such as concerts, noting that related legislation will soon be introduced to penalize resales at inflated prices. The authorities are additionally discussing measures to address accommodation price gouging in concert hosting areas, with solutions expected to be unveiled soon. Through the Presidential Cultural Exchange Committee launched 4 months ago, the minister said officials are also exploring ways to accelerate the global spread of K-culture.
We're planning to host a massive global concert in Korea by the end of next year, bringing together artists from all major entertainment agencies. We might be able to potentially integrate dedicated K-culture spaces at venues for those concerts, just like Korea House at the Olympics, offering immersive cultural experiences.
Choi further stressed the need for more large-capacity concert halls in Korea, with efforts underway to build venues capable of accommodating up to 50,000 people. The minister noted that additional financial support for the cultural sector will be provided, adding that there's a broad consensus within the government, including the president, on the significance of strengthening the industry. 박건우, Arirang News.
The American Chamber of Commerce in Korea hosted Trade Minister Yo Han-gu for a special luncheon in Seoul, where over 110 business leaders discussed the future of bilateral trade relations between South Korea and the U.S. Our Park Jun-han tells us more.
Trade Minister Yo Han-gu said on Thursday that Korea and the U.S. are going through pivotal moments in terms of bilateral trade. Yo's remarks were delivered at a critical time as Korea and the United States continue their high-level talks on tariff-related trade issues after the Special Act on the Management of Korea-U.S. Strategic Investments was proposed last November.
Following the proposal of the Special Act on Korea-U.S. Strategic Investment last November in our National Assembly, a dedicated special committee was established on February 9th to facilitate its passage. We are making every effort to see this legislation enacted as soon as possible. We are also working closely with our U.S. counterpart to implement the follow-up measures, including non-tariff issues outlined in the Korea-U.S. Joint Fact Sheet.
During his remarks, Minister Yo expressed appreciation for record-high U.S. foreign direct investment in Korea last year, driven by continued partnerships with American companies. He also pledged to faithfully implement the bilateral tariff agreement and proactively share progress with the U.S. side and the business community to enhance stability and deepen economic ties. AMCHAM Chairman and CEO James Kim, the host of the event, reaffirmed AMCHAM's full support for the Korean government's efforts and its commitment to close collaboration for a stable, forward-looking trade relationship.
I discussed with President Lee Jae-myung during our roundtable 2 weeks ago. And I look forward to working with President Lee and his administration to expand the number of global companies, regional headquarters here in Korea. Korea has less than 100 today. And what I told President Lee is I'd love to see, under his tenure, the number going from 100 to 1,000.
In a closed-door session, Minister Yo and Chairman Kim reportedly held in-depth exchanges on evolving global trade dynamics, bilateral investment cooperation, and steps to improve Korea's foreign direct investment environment. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
Exports of ICT products in January hit a record high for the month, reaching above $29 billion with semiconductors spearheading the shipments. And this comes as memory chips are in high demand, and South Korea's SK Hynix leads the market with high bandwidth memory chips. For more, we have our Kim Do-yeon in the studio with us. Welcome back, Do-yeon.
Thank you for having me.
So, Do-yeon, what are the details behind the latest numbers?
Right, as you said, ICT exports showed a significant increase in January amid high demand for memory chips, which Korean companies are strong in. Let's first take a look at the latest report. South Korea's information and communication technology sector has started the year by shattering previous records. According to the Trade Ministry on Thursday, ICT exports in January reached $29.05 billion, a 78.5% increase on year. With exports at $14.09 billion, the nation posted a massive trade surplus of $14.96 billion. This historic performance was driven almost entirely by semiconductors. Chip exports alone more than doubled to $20.55 billion. Breaking that down, the surge was led by memory chips, which skyrocketed 154.4% to $15.72 billion, fueled by demand for high-value products like HBM and DDR5 chips. This is likely to continue for the foreseeable future, as there's a severe shortage of HBM chips amid the AI boom.
Capacity will start to expand from the end of this year into 2027. However, until 2028, most supply is already locked in through long-term agreements, so the shortage will persist. Whether the shortage continues after 2028 will depend on how much demand increases by then.
This sold-out market has driven up export values across all major regions. The value of shipments to China, South Korea's largest market, rose nearly 95% to $11.76 billion. Exports to Vietnam jumped 63.6% to $4.67 billion, while exports to the European Union increased roughly 31%. Notably, exports to the United States recorded triple-digit growth, surging 110.7% to $4.62 billion as American big tech firms scrambled to secure essential AI infrastructure.
It really puts into perspective just how critical these chips are. Now, by looking at the numbers, Do-yeon, the U.S. saw a massive surge, triple-digit growth. Now, we know this is driven by NVIDIA, but why do they need so many of our chips specifically?
Right, to understand that, we first need to look at how semiconductors are classified. Let's take a look at this graphic. Broadly speaking, chips are divided into two main categories, memory and system chips. On the left, you have memory chips like DRAM and NAND, which store data. Think of them like a filing cabinet. On the right, you have system chips like GPUs and CPUs, which process data like a brain doing calculations. NVIDIA designs the GPU, the processor that does the heavy lifting for AI, but that brain needs to access a massive amount of information instantly. That's where South Korea comes in. The nation makes the HBM, or high bandwidth memory, which is a type of DRAM. You can't just have a fast brain, you need a super fast filing cabinet right next to it. NVIDIA literally cannot build their AI accelerators without attaching HBM chips to their GPUs. That's why you see that massive spike in exports to the US. They're buying every single HBM chip SK Hynix and Samsung can produce.
So it is a symbolic relationship, but with the demand this high, surely other countries will try to get in on this. Now, was the shortage expected, and where does China stand in all of this?
Now, that is a big question. Everyone knew AI was coming, but almost no one expected to be this fast, which is why we have this shortage. SK Hynix is only able to supply 60 to 70% of current orders because it didn't expect the demand. Also, that's one of the reasons why it has been seeing large profits. Now, as for China, they are investing heavily, but they are playing catch-up.
In the case of DRAM, there is currently a gap of about 2 to 3 years between South Korea and China. Because of this, China uses most of its domestic DRAM for legacy products, while South Korea's DRAM is used for high-end smartphones and data centers.
Now, a 2 to 3 year gap That's significant in the tech world, Toyeon. Now, if we're sold out until 2027, what is the next step for our chip makers?
Well, the race is speeding up. So while the two South Korean companies are currently dominating with HBM3E, both Samsung and SK-hynix are already moving to the next generation, HBM4. In fact, Samsung Electronics has already made a leap as it announced that mass production and shipment of HBM4 began today. A world first. They're calling it the world's best in terms of performance with a massive bandwidth of 3.3 terabytes per second. That's nearly triple the speed of the previous version. Crucially, they've expanded the capacity by stacking 16 layers of DRAM. A single HBM4 package can now hold up to 48 gigabytes of data. This is a game changer for training larger AI models. This is actually about a week earlier than the company set as a goal and adds to the company's efforts to reclaim the top spot from SK-hynix in terms of memory chips. SK-hynix is also readying its HBM4 mass production and is already developing the next version, HBM4E, for 2026 and 2027. The trend is moving toward custom HBM, where memory chips are tailor-made for specific customers like Google or NVIDIA, blurring the line between memory and logic.
I see. Toyeon, thank you for the comprehensive coverage tonight. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's daughter, Kim Joo-ae, is reportedly in the process of being designated as a successor. Those remarks were made by South Korea's National Intelligence Service during a closed-door briefing to the Parliamentary Intelligence Committee on Thursday. With Joo-ae's presence regularly highlighted at major events, including the founding anniversary of the Korean People's Army and a visit to the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun, signs of her expressing opinions on certain state policies have been detected, said the intelligence agency. The agency plans to keep a close eye on whether Kim Joo-ae participates in the North's key party congress scheduled for later this month. U.S. President Donald Trump has spoken of historic deals with countries including South Korea and Japan to boost American coal exports. Kim Bo-kyung has the details.
President Trump said Wednesday local time that his administration had signed historic trade agreements with South Korea, Japan, India, and other countries to dramatically increase coal exports. These remarks came while he was announcing policies at the White House to boost the coal industry. Previously, in July last year, Trump posted on Truth Social that Seoul will purchase $100 billion worth of liquefied natural gas and other energy-producing materials. There was no direct mention of coal at that time, nor a coal export agreement in a joint fact sheet released in November, so it remains unclear if such a deal between Seoul and Washington has been reached or not. While touting it as the most reliable energy resource for almost everyone, he referred to a series of measures to expand the coal-fired power generation industry and signed related executive orders. Included in these were instructions to the Tennessee Valley Authority, a U.S. federal electric utility, to continue operating two major coal plants, Cumberland and Kingston, which had been scheduled for closure. He also ordered the Energy Department to provide funding to keep the coal plants open.
I'm directing the Department of Energy to issue funds to coal plants in West Virginia, Ohio, North Carolina, and Kentucky to keep them online and keep those plants open.
In particular, he directed the Defense Department to secure long-term power purchase agreements with coal plants to ensure a more stable power supply and a stronger, more resilient power grid. He then pointed out that he approved dozens of projects to reopen coal mines to boost the coal industry.
But in 1 year of Trump, we've already approved over 70 permits for very big, very powerful mines that are going to be with us for many, many years to come. And we did that over the last 30 days.
Such moves by President Trump are seen as running counter to the global trend toward phasing out coal and expanding the use of renewable energy. 김보경, Arirang News.
Staying in the U.S., employment expands above expectations in January, but market experts warn against celebration, pointing to the worrisome numbers of 2025. Oh Soo-young has this report.
U.S. job growth unexpectedly picked up in January, easing immediate concerns of a sharp labor market slowdown, but experts warn of a long-term fragility. On Wednesday, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that employers added 130,000 jobs in January, far above market expectations, with major gains in healthcare. The unemployment rate ticked down 0.1 percentage points to 4.3%, while wage growth held up, with average hourly earnings rising about 0.4% in January. Yet the broader picture on jobs is less rosy. Annual benchmark revisions show that total job growth last year was dramatically slower than previously estimated, slashed from around 584,000 jobs to just 181,000. This means average monthly job growth was roughly 15,000 jobs, with employment gains concentrated heavily in healthcare and with minor gains in the retail and utility sectors. Meanwhile, job losses were recorded in financial services, transportation, mining and logging industries. Economists warn that the headline gains could be masking deeper weaknesses in the labour market, as broader losses in pay and income point to uneven growth.
Both of those metrics showed a spike in the second half of January. For the lost pay and income one, we'd actually seen this upward trend begin in late 2025. But what changed in 2026 is that it spread from more just the lower income group who were more isolated and kind of experiencing tougher economic conditions. It spread to hit the high income group. And that's kind of ringing alarm bells for me because of what we've seen with the K-shaped economy and because of how important that group has been for driving overall economic growth.
With hiring slowing and unemployment stable, many analysts believe the U.S. job market is entering a period of stagnation. Experts say the January report is likely to influence Federal Reserve expectations, likely adding to policymakers' reluctance to cut interest rates soon, as they continue to monitor inflation. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Global K-pop stars BTS and BLACKPINK are turning Korea's historic landmarks into entertainment stages. In fact, BLACKPINK is teaming up with the National Museum of Korea for a cultural campaign. The girl group will record audio guides for major artifacts, host a session for its new album at the museum, and light up the building's exterior in pink. Now, meanwhile, BTS will hold its comeback concert next month at Gwanghwamun Square, including a performance at Gyeongbokgung Palace to reflect the symbolic meaning of the title of its latest album, Arirang.
Hello and welcome. I am your AI sports correspondent, Arirang. This section features AI-generated content and scripts, bringing you the latest news from the Olympic Winter Games Milano Cortina 2026. Here are our top stories. South Korean teenagers Tae-ga-on and Lee Tae-woon both secured spots in the snowboard half-pipe finals on Wednesday at Living-No Snow Park. In the women's event, 17-year-old Tae-ga-on scored 82.25 points in her first run to finish 6th among 24 boarders. She remains a podium contender, alongside American Chloe Kim, who led the field with 90.25 points. In the men's qualification, 19-year-old Lee Tae-woon scored 82.00 points to finish 9th, securing his place in Friday's 12-man final. Both athletes will have 3 runs in their respective finals to determine the medal standings. South Korea's Gu Kyung-min finished 10th in the men's 1,000-meter speed skating final on Wednesday at the Milano Speed Skating Stadium. The 21-year-old Olympic debutant finished the race in 1 minute, 8.53 seconds, finishing 2.25 seconds behind the winner. American Jordan Stolz won the gold medal with a new Olympic record of 1 minute, 6.28 seconds. Gu stated after the race that he executed his plan well despite the high stakes. He now shifts his focus to the 500-meter sprint on Saturday. After a frustrating crash in the mixed relay, South Korea's short track stars are back on the ice for a shot at redemption. Choi Min-jung, Kim Gil-lee, and Lee So-yeon will compete in the women's 500 meters, while Im Jong-un, Hwang Dae-hun, and Shin Dong-min take part in the men's 1,000 meters. The team is now laser-focused on these upcoming finals. Despite concerns over soft ice causing falls, the skaters say they are ready. All eyes are on whether these individual races will bring Team Korea's first short track gold of the Games. A story of resilience has stolen the spotlight in Milan. Canadian ice dancers Piper Gillis and Paul Poirier have won the bronze medal. This victory comes just 3 years after Gillis was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. After 15 years of skating together, the veteran duo delivered an emotional performance set to the song Vincent to secure their first ever Olympic podium. Gillis hopes her journey inspires others facing dark times to keep believing in themselves. Before we head out, let's look ahead. Appearing now on your screen are the current medal standings and the upcoming schedule for the Olympic Winter Games Milano Cortina 2026.
It's another dusty day today all over the country. Fine dust is hanging over center areas as well as 전라북도 and 경상북도 provinces. Especially in 충청북도 province, ultrafine dust levels climb to the very bad levels. As more dust from overseas arrive, poor air quality is likely to stick around tomorrow. Dry conditions are continuing along the East Coast. A wildfire broke out in Gangwon-do province early this morning, and firefighters are still working to put it out. So please be extra careful to prevent fires. Seoul will start off at 2 degrees Celsius tomorrow morning, with Daejeon and Gwangju at -1 degree. Daily highs will rise to 11 degrees in Seoul, 8 degrees in Chuncheon. Early spring weather is expected throughout the New Year holidays. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
drawing more fans from all over the world. Local consumer prices continue to hover at the 2% success rate in April. Turning to robots to allow the visually impaired the chance to better indulge in cultural experiences. Like the number of hybrid cars are registered in South Korea has surpassed 2 million with this locally developed Yuri rocket.
Arirang. Knock knock. The magical door to the world of K-animation is swinging wide open. Meet your instant new BFF, the adorable Catch. Tina Ping will have you hooked from the very first glance. Need a hand? Our Robocar Poli Rescue team is always zooming in to save the day. How about tagging along on Pinkfong and Pal's super exciting quest to reclaim their lost magic? With the mysterious life forms Cabion by your side, you can become a Cabion master and save humanity like a total hero. Protecting children's innocence while igniting their boundless imagination. That's the magic of Korean animation. K-animation, the ultimate bestie for kids worldwide.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. Trade tensions are back in the spotlight. President Trump is warning that tariffs on Korean goods could jump back to 25%, citing delays in Seoul's legislative progress on the U.S.-Korea Investment Act. Korea asked for more time, but Washington refused to hold off on the official notice. At the same time, U.S. jobs data came in much stronger than expected. Hiring surged and employment fell to 4.3%, and markets are quickly adjusting their bets on when the Fed might cut rates. For Korea, this means higher pressure from both policy risk and financial volatility, just as lawmakers race the clock and foreign investors watch closely. For a deeper discussion on the current situation, we connect to Kim Yong-jin, professor at Seoul Business School. A big welcome, Professor Kim.
Good evening. Pleasure to be here.
And also joining us is Hwa-Kyun Kim, professor of banking and finance at Texas A&M University's Mays Business School. Good to see you, Professor.
Thank you for the invite.
So let's start with the source of the tension, Professor Hwa-Kyun. President Trump has warned that tariffs on Korean goods could rise again back to 25%, pointing at delays in the legislative progress in Seoul. Beyond the public messaging, what strategic objectives do you think are driving this pressure from Washington?
The first one is probably a very direct one, in that by wanting to move tariffs from, say, 15% back up to 25% on autos, lumbers, pharmaceutical, and other reciprocal items, I think Washington is trying to reestablish a sense of urgency in Seoul's political system and trying to make more like Korea's legislative delays into a U.S. one. So it's kind of a saying, like, if your parliament cannot move fast, and your exporters will pay. So that kind of very direct message. And then another one is probably the more like the domestic one. Then administration has been repeatedly framing these measures in terms of this bilateral trade deficit and national security, and wants to accelerate the Korean capital spending and production on U.S. soil as part of broader reshoring and the friendshoring strategy. So I think this type of warning is tied to more like a special investment deal that Korea promised, I think, already of about $350 billion or something, and then try to deliver this U.S.-bound investment as soon as possible so that you can keep the preferential access. And then obviously this one has more like the signaling message to other countries, and as we saw also with the Japan receiving the same type of the warning, and probably the next in line is going to be Europe. So I think the U.S. is using the Korea as like a starting point to signal other countries to press the implementing the deals that they have made. So overall, I think these are the strategic motives that they have.
Right. The 25% figure definitely adds a lot of urgency, both politically and economically. And of course, South Korea's parliament seemed to have got the message. The National Assembly has launched a bipartisan committee to pass the U.S.-Korea Investment Act by the end of this month. Professor Yongjin, do you think that timeline is actually realistic? And if it gets missed, what do you think Washington will respond to that?
Well, as you mentioned, the South Korean National Assembly has established 16-member bipartisan special committee with a specific 30-day mandate to pass the special act on the management of strategic investment between South Korea and the United States, what is called U.S.-Korea Investment Act. While there is high-level political pressure to pass the bill by the end of February, the committee's formal activity period officially run until March 9. From a procedural standpoint, the timeline is very aggressive, but feasible, because the committee has been granted direct legislative authority to process related bills by consensus within its 1-month term. However, significant political hurdles remain, including partisan friction, although the committee has formed with bipartisan agreement on February 9th. Its first plenary meeting on February 12th, today, right, was halted shortly after opening. This was due to a clash between the ruling Democratic Party and the opposition People Power Party over unrelated judicial reform bills. Passing the bill of U.S.-Korea Investment Act, it requires consensus. This means that any renewed partisan deadlock could easily push the vote past the end of February target. When it comes to Washington's expected response, if the timeline is missed, Washington's patience appears very thin. U.S. President Donald Trump, has already linked legislative delays, directly to tariff increases. The U.S. government has reportedly begun preparations to publish this tariff increase in the Federal Register. When considering the situation, U.S. officials, have recently raised fundamental grievances regarding non-tariff barriers. The failure to meet the due date will incur, I think, serious damage to Korean economy or the economic relations between Korea and the U.S.
Right, so the current bipartisan wrangling should really stop as soon as possible to resolve this problem. And as Professor Yongjin has just mentioned, the U.S. is preparing to register this to the Federal Register. Professor Hwa Gyun, could you tell us, for our viewers, explain for us, once this notice gets published, what does it actually mean economically and legally for South Korea?
As you kind of alluded, once a formal notice is published in the Federal Register, then this tariff hikes becomes more like a legal process and then compliance item. So then agencies will lock in the new rate of 25% or something, and then importers must start planning around this 25% tax duty on covered Korean goods, unless or until that notice is revised or withdrawn, as we kind of have seen in other cases. So economically, that means exporters in autos and other areas face immediate margin pressure. So either they have to kind of absorb these kind of shocks, just lowering the profit margin, or they have to pass this cost onto U.S. consumers, so they're increasing the prices. So that's going to kind of work anyway adversely to the Korean the exporters, and also I think the U.S. consumers. Legally, however, I think the publication does not mean the story is completely over. So these tariffs actually are being justified under these authorities like the Section 232 or some other emergency reciprocal tools as we have seen. So the U.S. actually, the president can suspend implementation dates, carve out some of the exemptions, or issue a follow-up rule modifying the original notice if they want. So depending on the negotiations with the Seoul, how that actually makes progresses, it can actually be still quite a negotiable item. So Korea can initially loses its ability to quietly procrastinate the clock, but I think it still has some window of time and opportunity through like rapid passage of this Investment Act and credible movement on their non-tariff concerns and stuff like that. So I think it is a very critical one and it's a legal procedure, but I think it has rooms to negotiate still.
Right. So the best way, as I hear it for now, is to swiftly pass the bill before it gets to the register, because it seems a little bit
Yes, given that we anyway have to do it, right?
And adding to this complexity, the deputy USTR is now in Seoul. There's speculation that Washington also is tying tariff hikes not just to investment delays, but also the so-called non-tariff barriers, as we touched upon a while ago, including digital platform rules. Professor Yongjin, what exactly is the U.S. targeting under that label?
Yeah, so basically Washington's primary targets under the label of non-tariff barriers in the digital sector regulations is viewed as discriminatory toward American big tech firms. These include the Online Platform Act, Information and Communication Network Act amendment, and high-precision mapping data and network usage fees, and finally, coupon issues. Firstly, the U.S. is strongly opposing the proposed law of Platform Competition Promotion Act, which is modeled after the EU's Digital Market Act. The U.S. argues that preemptive designation of market-dominant platforms unfairly target U.S. big tech companies like Google, Apple, and Meta, while benefiting Chinese companies. They believe that the act seeks to ban practice such as self-preferencing, bundling, and restricting merchants from rival platforms, which is the U.S. labels as anti-innovation. Secondly, Washington has expressed significant concerns over recent revisions aimed at tackling online disinformation or false or manipulated information, right? The law requires platforms to monitor and report false manipulated information. However, the U.S. views those requirements as excessive regulation that could lead to private censorship or infringe on freedom of expression and put an undue burden on American firms. Thirdly, the U.S. is pushing for Google to be allowed to export high-resolution Korean map data to overseas servers. This is a long-standing point of friction. Korean government has historically restricted this kind of data to local servers for national security reasons. Now, finally, fourthly, the U.S. continues to oppose proposed rules that could require content providers like Netflix and YouTube to pay fees to Korean internet service providers for network usage. Washington defines these fees as a discriminatory non-tariff barrier. Finally, the U.S. House Judiciary Committee and the USTR have specifically highlighted the aggressive targeting of coupon by Korean regulators following a data breach, right? And then U.S. officials have warned that such harsh discrimination violated the non-discrimination commitment made in November 2025 joint fact sheet, because coupon is 100% owned by a U.S.-listed parent.
Right. So it seems to be expanding deeper into regulatory friction as well. Now we wonder the question, how are markets actually reacting to this latest tariff pressure? And looking at Korean and global asset classes, where do you see the greatest sensitivity, Professor Hwa-kyun?
So, like I mentioned, markets have treated Trump's tariff threat as a real deal, but at the same time, also somewhat negotiable risk. In that sense, I think the markets have been more resilient, especially in case of Korean market. I saw the KOSPI actually increased like almost by more than 3% today or something. So clearly, the market has been pretty resilient. But clearly there could be some worries and wobbles on like some of the asset classes that focus on the sectors that the Korea is strong. And also I think nowadays the Korean stock market itself is like a center of attention even to the foreign investors. So as on a personal note, some of my friends actually start asking about like a Korean stock market, and they actually buy the Korean ETFs and things like that on ADRs. So clearly that kind of things can be somewhat, sensitive to it if the deal is going to be at the real risk. And as of now, I think the investors still seem to pricing a meaningful probability that the diplomacy and the legislation will at least soften the blow to some extent. And other than those areas that are they're driven by this, the exports, other areas seem to do perfectly fine, semiconductors and others. So I think that part is less sensitive, obviously. And then, of course, the corporate bonds or debt of these firms that are more sensitive to these type of the political risk and uncertainty will actually have issues of financing and refinancing. On flip side, of course, if this is the case, then maybe investors who have made some money actually want to put their money onto a more safe kind of haven. Then in that case, by contrast, I think some of the government bonds and the US dollar or some of the relatively safe assets can be demanded more heavily. So I think in that case, it's a different types of sensitivity, but I think there could be some migration of the investors to the more safer areas.
Let's also spend some time to touch upon U.S. fundamentals, Professor Hwagin. January's job report showed hiring accelerating well beyond expectations, while unemployment fell to 4.3%. Do you think this suggests that labor market is proving to be more resilient than what's feared?
Yeah, I think so. So initially, people were really worried, and then experts actually also worried a lot. And then together with this AI, somewhat like a worry about the AI encroaching the labor market was added, and therefore there was some big push back to the stock market and also some other, the areas. But I think, as you mentioned, the job gains actually have been the much better. And unemployment also ticked down a bit, so from the 4.4 to 4.3. So I think initial worry, was largely resolved. But then I think when you look at the sectoral strength, the strong hiring, I think, was happening in healthcare and social assistance and some of the construction part. And also there was some wage growth, but then all other sectors, actually, we have seen some signs that cooling still, so beneath the headline numbers. So I think that was a little bit of some still concerns and consensus. I wouldn't say consensus, but I think some of the opinions converging is that still the labor market is cooling down a bit. So it's much better than expected. Therefore, we don't have to worry too much about it. But I think there's no diverse opinions about the cooling down labor market.
So with this still firm labor market and wages rising faster than expected, markets are now dialing back expectations for early rate cuts. Professor Yongjin, how does this data reshape the Fed's outlook, particularly on the timing of the first cut?
Well, before we determine the direction or expect the direction of FRB Fed, we need to look at consumer price index a little bit more. Official consumer price index data for January was delayed and is scheduled to release on Friday. Right? So we may see preliminary indicators and forecast. These indicators and forecasts suggest a mixed result. Analysts expect the year-over-year inflation rate to drop to 2.5%, down from 2.7 in December. core CPI, excluding food and energy, is also projected to rise 2.5% annually, which would be its lowest level since 2021. The numerator CPI, which tracks everyday household and purchases, showed a 0.23% decline in January. This is the first monthly drop in nearly a year, which is suggesting some cooling in essential good prices. So basically, the unexpectedly good job market, but there's some weakened point of cooling part, and also softening CPI. But still, the Fed will keep its current approach of wait and see, which signaling an extended pause in interest rate cut, while softening inflation provide room for eventual easing. The surprisingly resilient January labor market. I'm not sure what Hagin would say, but superficially, look outside, it's very strong. This labor market, has reduced urgency for a near-term cut, shifting the likely timeline for the next reduction to mid-2026.
Then, Professor, with all of that, going back to Seoul, Seoul is warning that the tariff pressure from the Trump administration, it could really persist through the year 2026. In your view, what kind of long-term trade posture should Korea adopt to stay resilient without overreacting to short-term shocks?
Well, I was very impressed by the Indian government strategy when the U.S.-Indian trade deal was closed. So we need to really, really take Indian government examples. So my recommendations are from what Indian government has been doing until they got the expected result. In general, to remain resilient throughout 2026, South Korea must transition from a reactive stance, meaning, scrambling to pass bills in response to a tweet of Mr. Trump, no, to a structural trade posture. This involves neutralizing the leverage Washington, hold over Seoul while building a more diversified economic foundation. The first one is the investment for exemption framework. Instead of treating the 50 billion investment pledge as one-time concession, Korea should frame it as a long-term strategic partnership. For that, it needs to leverage areas where the U.S. has high dependency on Korea. For example, high-end semiconductors, electric vehicle batteries, and shipbuilding, to secure long-term tariff exemptions. Second one is de-risking through partnership. Partnership diversification. South Korea needs to reduce its vulnerability to U.S. policy shift by expanding its footprint elsewhere, and need to accelerate the shift of manufacturing hub to ASEAN and India to create a secondary export engine that is less sensitive to Korean won-US dollar volatility and U.S. trade wars. It also needs to join CPTPP, Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, to embed Korea in a rule-based trading bloc that provide a buffer against the unilateral protectionism. Third one is regulatory front-running on non-tariff barriers. Washington has signaled, that digital platform rules and data localization are the next frontiers of friction. So rather than, waiting for U.S. subpoenas, Seoul should align its domestic platform regulations with international standards, such as OECD guidelines, to ensure they are perceived as a fair competition measures rather than anti-American barriers. The final one is to move from exporting product to exporting production, to stay resilient against persistent, 15 to 25% tariff draft. The made in Korea label for the U.S. export must increasingly become made by Korea in the U.S.
Wow, a very strong message to conclude our discussion tonight. Shifting from a reactive stance to preparing for a more structural trade posture, a very important message from you. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Yong-jin.
Thanks for having me.
And of course, Professor Hwagin, we really appreciate your time.
Always pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.